Today we're headed over to Surrey County, and I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite day trip spots, Pilot Mountain. Welcome to the NCPedia podcast. I'm your host Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. Now, my microphone decided it wasn't going to work this time, so I'm going to do the best I can with the audio. It's kind of inconvenient. Before I get started, I just want to say thanks again for listening. If you can't tell by the sound of my voice, I have a cold. I feel miserable, and it's very cold outside today. And if you're watching on YouTube, the wind's blowing. It's not a very good day for podcasting, but I really need to get it done. And speaking of YouTube, if you're listening on a podcast player and you want to put a face with the name, there'll be a YouTube link for the NCPedia Podcast YouTube channel in the description below, as well as a link to the Facebook group and the way to contact me. And I want to go ahead and get into this show because I'm freezing, so let's go ahead and talk about Pilot Mountain. Pilot Mountain is what's left of an ancient mountain range called the Cerudo Mountains. But one thing that makes the entire Cerudo mountain range unique is how it came to be. You see, most mountain ranges are the result of shifting tectonic plates. The two plates slam together, causing an earthquake, and that's slamming together. All that force has to go somewhere, and it's usually up. And when it goes up, it takes a whole lot of land with it, so mountains literally burst out of the ground. But that's not the case with the Cerudo mountain range. The Cerudo mountain range, it was just high elevated land masses at the bottom of an endless ocean. Well, the ocean receded and the land around these elevations began to erode away. Over millions of years, the erosion took everything away except for the features that you see today. Most notably, Pilot Mountain and Hanging Rock. Now, why didn't they erode away with the rest of the land? It's because they're actually quartzite rock, which is very hard and very durable. Back when the whole area was at the bottom of the sea, it was made up of sand. And again, over millions of years, the sand turned into this quartzite by heat and pressure. Parts of the quartzite would eventually crack and break off, leaving a huge knob that we now call Pilot Mountain. By the way, it's been suggested to me by some of my tinfoil hat friends that Pilot Mountain is actually a humongous petrified tree stump, but to my knowledge, there's been no science to back that up. Pilot Mountain is, however, what they call a quartzite monadnock. Now, before we get into the history, I want to kind of describe Pilot Mountain. When you're looking at the mountain from a distance, it looks like one big middle finger sticking up out of the relatively flat land. I feel like that's North Carolina giving Virginia the bird. Anyway, what you can't really see that well from below is there's actually two knobs. Big Pinnacle is what you normally see if you're driving in the area or you Google Pilot Mountain. It's the main feature. It rises 200 feet from the base to the top, and it's 1,400 feet above the valley floor below. It's made up of sheer cliffs all the way around. Remember I was talking about the quartzite breaking and falling off? And when I say sheer, they really are straight up and down. There's no walking to the top of Big Pinnacle. There is a really nice trail that takes you in a circle around the base of Big Pinnacle, though. Then there's Little Pinnacle. You can see Little Pinnacle from down below, but unless you are in the right spot or you know what you're looking for, you might not really be able to make it out. It's adjacent to Big Pinnacle, and if you visit the park and walk the main trail, you'll end up at the top of Little Pinnacle, looking over at the Big Pinnacle and the valley below. And it's a really incredible view. If you know me or you listen to the show, you know how much I love the mountains, but Pilot Mountain is a lot different. In western North Carolina, you can pull onto an overlook and you'll see the peaks kind of fading off in the distance. At Pilot Mountain, there's literally nothing but flat ground around it, or pretty much flat ground. So it's kind of like looking out of an airplane window. You can just make out a tiny little gray line that's Highway 52. You can see the square frames that are the various crop fields all around. You can see little houses with smoke coming out of the chimneys. And sometimes you can even see tiny little cows in the cow pastures. It's really unreal how much you can see from one spot up there. Anyway, let's move on to the history. The first inhabitants of the area were the Saura Indians, and they called the mountain Jomeokee, which meant Great God. This was because you could see the mountain from so far away, travelers used to use it kind of like a guiding feature. Native American travelers on the Great Wagon Road and European settlers used it when they were going from north to south. Eventually, like in every story, the sorry Indians were pushed out, but this time it was actually the Cherokee who gave them the boot. The Cherokee, they occupied the area around Pilot Mountain for a while, but they eventually moved on in the early 1700s when pioneers and settlers showed up. The first European settlers in the area, the Moravians, arrived around the late 1740s from Pennsylvania. I talk about the Moravians in episode 29 on Old Salem. Settlement around the Pilot Mountain area really didn't blow up like other places, mainly because it was literally in the middle of nowhere. It was kind of isolated. There weren't many trails to this spot, and the only river nearby was the Yadkin River, and it really wasn't great for transportation. This is kind of where you went if you wanted to get away from it all. In 1751, two guys decided to make a map of the mountain itself. These guys were Joshua Fry and Peter Jefferson. Peter Jefferson would later father a child named Thomas Jefferson, and you may have heard of young Thomas Jefferson. I don't know who, if anybody, owned the mountain back then, but in the 1850s, Pilot Mountain was owned by the Gilliam family, and the Gilliams had an idea. They just knew that folks would want to get a closer look at this colossal feature. So they put up ladders so people could climb up to the top and have a look around from the pinnacles. And I read that these ladders were pretty sketchy. Now I'm sure they had their fair share of visitors, but it never really became the hot spot that they were hoping for. In the 1920s, a guy named W.L. Spoon buys Pilot Mountain, and he wanted to make it a big tourist attraction. He puts in roads and picnic areas on Little Pinnacle, and there was even an airstrip at the top. And this airstrip was named the highest airstrip in the South. Over on Big Pinnacle, he built a staircase that went all the way 200 feet to the top. It drew crowds as well, but nothing really major. In the 1940s, a guy named J.W. Beasley buys the mountain, and he wants to make it a fun area for locals to hang out. And it ended up being the spot for locals. Beasley installs a swimming pool on the mountain, and he charges an admission to go swimming. The pool was said to have 2 diving boards and a water slide. Over where the campgrounds are today, Beasley had built a pavilion for parties and dancing, and I'd read that it was literally a giant concrete slab with a roof over it. At night, live bands would come up the mountain, and they'd play deep into the night. Hundreds of people used to hang out there. Unfortunately, the Pilot Mountain party scene finally ended after a fight broke out there one night, and somebody was arrested, and this led to the death of a law enforcement officer. And I actually tried to find more to that story. I was curious about it, but I couldn't really find anything, but I think we'll probably do some more digging on that. Anyway, it wasn't long after that the pavilion was closed to the public, and a few years later, the pool shut down. Now we're in 1968. A group who called themselves the Pilot Mountain Preservation and Park Committee suggested Pilot Mountain should become a state park. The idea was born out of a desire to protect the feature from development and eventual ruin. They started a relationship with the surviving owner, Miss J.W. Beasley, and eventually they purchased the land with the help of a federal grant. And so in 1968, Pilot Mountain State Park was born as the 14th state park in North Carolina. Now this Pilot Mountain Preservation and Park Committee, they also purchased over 1,000 acres of land nearby on the Yadkin River, and that was added to the state park in the 70s. Over the years, more and more land was added to the park, and today, Pilot Mountain State Park encompasses about 3,700 acres. So now, in addition to the 2 main features, the pinnacles, you also have plenty of hiking options and a campground on the mountain. The Yadkin River section to the south of Pilot Mountain also offers hiking as well as kayaking and canoeing. And lastly, there's a historic farm in the park, which I didn't really know about this historic farm until I started putting this episode together. But the Horn Creek Farm State Historic Site is an old farm that's been restored to look the way it did in the early 1900s. And the whole idea behind the restoration is to help preserve and display North Carolina's rural heritage. Now, before I wrap up this very short episode, if you want to visit Pilot Mountain, the park is open from March to September, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and from October to February, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Also, if you're wondering, there's no admission fee at the park. You can drive right up there and see it, but if you want to camp, there's a cost for that. And that's all I have on Pilot Mountain. I know that was a really short episode. I got to throw in some short ones every once in a while. But like I said, I feel pretty crummy today, so I don't mind being pretty quick about the recording. I will say, you're going to hear me say that a lot of stuff in North Carolina is great, and a lot of stuff in North Carolina is great. But Powell Mountain, I'm not just boosting it. It is, it's pretty incredible being up there. It's something that I don't know if you'll get a chance to see anywhere else in the world. Anyway, if you liked the episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Check out the links below for Facebook, YouTube, and there's a show called Tasting NC, which I do with my wife, where we taste everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. And for me, I'm going to get in and warm my hands up, start doing some editing, and I'll talk to you next time.